The money is gone, Liam. We've already moved everything to Sarah's side of the family. My father said it like he was announcing dessert, not a verdict. Beside him, my stepmother wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. If you'd been more supportive, she added, tilting her head, you might have received something. But now, you'll get nothing. I set my fork down and folded my napkin once, twice. Good, I said, keeping my voice level. That makes things easier. My name is Liam Carrington, and for most of my life, I tried to believe our Sunday dinners meant what families say they mean. Belonging, memory, a table where names and stories get passed like bowls of roasted potatoes. But this is Charlottesville, Virginia, where old brick houses and old reputations sometimes matter more than the truth. And tonight, beneath the polished glow of our dining room chandelier, truth was the only thing left that felt solid. The room smelled like rosemary and lemon, the roast perfectly carved, the china gleaming in the firelight. My father, Richard, had shaved for this, his jaw clean and almost boyish, as if neatness could make cruelty reasonable. Across from him, Sarah dabbed at the corner of her mouth with a crisp linen square, as though sweeping away the last trace of conscience. A painting of my grandfather hung above the mantel, broad-shouldered, steady-eyed, the man who built the Carrington estate and taught me that integrity is wealth that can't be stolen. He stared down at me now, dignified as ever, a quiet witness to what his son had become. You're taking this rather calmly, Sarah said. Most people would raise their voice. I'm not most people, I said. Father cleared his throat. It's done. We've restructured the holdings, the estate, the accounts, the stakes in the vineyard, all consolidated under a new plan. You'll be comfortable, of course, for a while. The trust will cover necessities. The trust you changed without telling me, I said. He winced. It was almost imperceptible. You were never interested in the business. I was never invited, I said. That's different. The grandfather clock in the hall counted out the hour with patient, resonant notes. Outside, the winter wind moved through the oaks, a soft rush like the breath of someone standing just behind you. I felt the house listening. I felt my grandfather listening. Liam, Father went on, you have to understand what family requires. Loyalty, support. When Sarah came into our lives, we needed unity. You chose distance. I had chosen long walks through the south field where the ground still remembered my grandfather's boots. I had chosen the small workshop behind the barn, where the scent of pine and oil and iron could make a man feel like his hands were good for more than signing papers. I had chosen not to nod along when the account started moving into names I didn't recognize. Unity isn't a ledger entry, I said. Sarah leaned forward, elbows just shy of the table. She understood posture. You can't survive out there on principles. Money moves to the people who know what to do with it. Then I suppose you'll be very busy, I said. She smiled again, pleasant as a blade. I finished my water and set the glass down, mindful not to scrape the stemware. I'll collect my things in the morning, I said. No need to wake anyone. Father looked suddenly older. You're leaving? You told me I don't belong, I said. I'm listening. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Perhaps he expected a scene, raised voices, accusations, the theater that lets a guilty man feel like he's suffered enough. But rage is a poor instrument. I had learned that from a man who could make a dovetail joint so clean you couldn't slide a whisper through it. At the doorway, I turned back to the painting above the mantel. The firelight played across my grandfather's varnished face, and for an instant it seemed like his gaze shifted, almost a nod. I remembered a line from my grandfather's notebook, the one with his initials burned into the cover, that I'd copied years ago and kept. When deceit takes root, truth must rise quietly. Good night, I said. Sarah's voice followed me down the hall. What did you mean, easier? I paused with my hand on the newel post. The wood was smooth from 3 generations of hands. You'll find out, I said, soon enough. Outside, the air smelled of cold earth and wood smoke. Stars hung clean over the dark line of the Blue Ridge. I walked the gravel path toward my truck, the stones crunching underfoot, each step steady. In the kitchen window, I saw 2 silhouettes, one pacing, one rigid, small against all that polished glass. They believed they'd closed a door. They didn't see the other one that had been left open. And somewhere on this land, where names are carved into stone and secrets into floorboards, lay what my grandfather always promised. A kind of wealth that doesn't vanish when someone decides you're inconvenient. I unlocked the truck and slid behind the wheel. The engine turned once, then caught. Headlights washed over the barn and the narrow path beyond. I let the heat come up slowly and rested my hands on the wheel. My knuckles were calm. My breath was even. "Good," I said to the empty cab. "Let's make this easy." Then I eased down the drive, past the dark hedges, past the sleeping vines, past the places where truth remembers how to wait. The workshop smelled of dust and cedar, the kind of air that holds its breath until someone worthy returns. Sunlight filtered through the small windows in thin, patient lines. I hadn't stepped inside since grandfather's funeral. His tools still hung in perfect rows, each one wiped clean, handles darkened by years of honest work. On the workbench sat a small wooden chest covered by a sheet of canvas. I lifted the cloth and felt the grain under my fingers. The hinges groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Inside, beneath yellowed sketches and old receipts, lay a leather-bound notebook. My grandfather's initials were burned into the cover, J.C. for James Carrington. I brushed away the dust and opened it. His handwriting leaned forward on the page, steady but strong. Some notes were about carpentry and crops, but others were stranger, lines written like riddles. When deceit takes root, truth must rise quietly. The covenant protects what blood cannot. The last phrase was underlined twice. I traced the ink with my thumb. The covenant. He'd spoken that word once when I was a boy. I'd thought he meant a promise, a man's word. Now it looked more like a code. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the journal spread open and a pot of black coffee cooling beside me. I tried to read between the lines, but each clue seemed to fold into another. Sketches of the estate's floor plans appeared beside fragments of scripture, banking terms, and small triangles drawn near property lines. It was deliberate, layered, like he'd hidden meaning behind the everyday. By midnight, I was staring at the words, Section 12, Trustee Provisions, when a memory struck. Grandfather arguing with my father years ago. Voices rising in the study, the word clause cutting through the wall like a knife. I called the only man who might still remember, Mr. Delaney, our family's lawyer for almost 50 years. He answered on the second ring, voice raspy but alert. "Liam Carrington," he said. "I wondered when you'd reach out." "You knew my grandfather better than anyone," I told him. "I found something, a journal. He wrote about something called the Covenant. Does that mean anything to you?" There was a long pause. Paper rustled on the other end. "Bring it to my office tomorrow morning. And Liam, don't mention this to your father." The next day, his office smelled of old paper and pipe smoke. The man looked smaller than I remembered, but his eyes were still sharp. He read silently for a long time, lips moving over each line. Finally, he closed the notebook and leaned back. "I warned your father not to tamper with your grandfather's estate," he said. "This confirms what I feared. The covenant wasn't a metaphor, it's a clause, one James added before signing the final testament. Hidden in the appendix filed under charitable trusts, it states that any descendant who transfers family assets outside the bloodline without consent forfeits all inheritance rights. I felt a cold spark travel through me. "You mean," he nodded, "if your father moved those holdings to Sarah's relatives, as you said, he violated the covenant itself?" "Legally and morally," I leaned forward. "Can it be enforced?" Mr. Delaney opened a drawer and pulled out an aging file, the Carrington seal stamped in red wax. "The original documents are here. Your father had me prepare copies, but this," he tapped the folder, "is the signed version. I kept it sealed, just as your grandfather instructed, until someone came asking for the truth." The room seemed to shrink around us. I could hear the faint ticking of his desk clock, the same rhythm as the grandfather clock in our dining room. "What happens now?" I asked. Delaney looked at me over his glasses, his expression somewhere between pity and pride. "Now," he said softly, "we verify every transfer your father made. And Liam," he lowered his voice until it was almost a whisper, "if your father moved the assets illegally, he just signed away his own inheritance." The words hung in the air like the scent of smoke after lightning. Outside, snow began to fall over the old town, blanketing the roofs and the courthouse steps. I closed the notebook and slipped it back into my coat. For the first time since that dinner, I wasn't angry. I was certain. The covenant would protect what blood could not. And the truth, quiet, patient truth, had just begun to rise. Sarah called it a chat. Her voice on the phone was sugar over ice. "You've been working too hard, Liam. Why don't you stop by the house tomorrow? We can put everything behind us, everything." She always used that word as if life were a drawer she could shut neatly. When I arrived, the Carrington estate looked the same, but something in its silence had shifted. The blinds were drawn, the roses trimmed too short. My father's car sat in the drive, still warm. I followed the scent of her perfume, amber and power, into the study. Sarah stood by the window, one hand on the drape, light slicing across her diamond bracelet. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Richard will be along shortly. He's in town finalizing a few adjustments. She gestured toward the decanter, and I poured 2 glasses of brandy. She didn't touch hers. "I've been thinking about you," she began, smiling just enough. "You've always been so principled. It's admirable, really. But principles don't pay for new beginnings." I said nothing. Silence unnerves people like Sarah. She slid a check across the table. $10,000. "Consider this an early inheritance," she said. "We can avoid lawyers, paperwork, embarrassment. You can start fresh somewhere else." I looked at the check without reaching for it. "Generous," I said. "But you might be underestimating what embarrassment is worth." Her smile didn't falter. "Liam, you're angry now, but you'll see this is best for everyone. Your father has a lot on his plate. The new ventures require focus. You don't want to burden him with legal nonsense." "New ventures?" I asked. She hesitated just long enough. "Real estate, mostly. Diversification. You know how markets are." I let her talk, feeding on her own cleverness. It was always her favorite meal. My father entered mid-sentence, jacket slung over his arm, his expression weary and vague, the look of a man who's traded conviction for comfort. "Sarah, perhaps this isn't the time," he murmured. "It's exactly the time," she said. "We're closing one chapter." He avoided my eyes. "Your stepmother's trying to make peace," I studied him. Once his voice had filled rooms. Now it sounded like an echo seeking its source. "Is that what this is, Father? Peace?" He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I can't undo what's been done. We all have to move forward." Sarah reached out, her manicured fingers brushing his sleeve like reins. "Richard," she said sweetly, "why don't you let me handle this?" And he did. He always did. I stood, buttoning my coat. "You handle a great deal." "Sarah, I only wonder whose name is really on the account statements you're handling." The color drained from her face, just a flicker. "But I saw it. Don't threaten me," she said quietly. "I don't have to." I tapped the journal inside my jacket pocket. "You've already done the heavy lifting." I left the check on the desk and walked out through the hall, the sound of their muffled argument following me like distant thunder. That night I drove to the Vineyard office, the one Sarah claimed was part of the new portfolio. The building was locked, but the mailbox overflowed with courier envelopes. I took one addressed to Carrington Heritage Holdings, LLC. The postmark was from a town 2 counties north, where Sarah's son managed a failing construction firm. At home, under the desk lamp, I slid it open carefully. Inside were transfer documents, stock certificates and deeds, all bearing my father's signature. But the ownership trail ended in names I didn't recognize. Evan Parker, Lisa Parker. Sarah's children. Each page bore a watermark of the Carrington crest, our family's sigil. But something about it felt off. The edges were too clean, the ink too new. I turned the last page and froze. At the bottom of the document, pressed into the paper beside my father's signature, was a red wax seal, the old family emblem. My grandfather's seal, only one person had ever kept it after his death. My father. I lifted the paper toward the light. The wax glistened faintly, the edges smudged, as if someone had reheated and reused it. The same seal my grandfather once said should never be touched by dishonest hands. I sat back. Heartbeat steady but heavy. The check from Sarah lay folded in my pocket, still uncashed. A token from the game she thought she was winning. but now I knew where to look next. If that seal had been used, then whatever it guarded, whatever truth my grandfather left behind, was still here, hidden somewhere inside these walls, and I intended to find it. The night carried the kind of quiet that feels older than memory. I parked by the barn and let the engine fade into the dark. The moon hung low, brushing silver across the fields. The workshop waited at the edge of the property, a square of shadow against the pale frost. Inside, the air was still heavy with cedar and thyme. The lamp above the bench flickered to life, and dust rose like ghosts disturbed from sleep. I placed the envelope with the falsified seal on the table beside Grandfather's notebook. The two belonged together, truth and imitation staring each other down. I read again his handwriting, steady and deliberate. When deceit takes root, truth must rise quietly. And below it, a faint sketch of the workbench itself, drawn from above, with strange dotted lines crossing beneath the floorboards. I knelt, feeling the cool boards under my palms. The knots were familiar. I'd sanded them once as a boy while Grandfather taught me how patience could make a surface shine. Near the leg of the bench, one plank sat slightly higher than the rest. I pressed it. A soft click echoed. My pulse slowed to a rhythm I could count. I pried the board loose, and the scent of aged wood and oil drifted upward. Beneath it, a small metal handle glinted. The hatch lifted with a groan, revealing a narrow cavity wrapped in waxed cloth. Inside rested a box no larger than a bread loaf. Iron corners worn but intact. The key was already there, taped to the underside of the lid, as if Grandfather had planned for me to find it this way. The lock turned smoothly, and the lid opened with a sigh. Papers lay in neat bundles bound with twine. Stock certificates, ledgers, a folder of property deeds, all in my grandfather's meticulous order. On top rested an envelope with my name in his hand. The ink had faded to brown. I unfolded the letter carefully. My dear Liam, if you are reading this, then truth has come late, but not too late. You must remember that integrity, once lost, cannot be bought back with wealth. The estate is yours, not for possession, but for protection. Those who seek to own everything will end with nothing. Let them. You were always meant to rebuild, not to retaliate. Below his signature was a single line, almost an afterthought. The covenant protects what blood cannot. My throat tightened. For the first time since this began, the tears came, quiet, unhurried, not from anger, but from relief. The burden wasn't vengeance. It was stewardship. The inheritance wasn't a victory. It was an instruction. Among the documents, I found one sealed packet, the original deed to the Carrington estate, issued nearly 70 years ago. The last amendment, signed 5 years before his death, bore my name, transferring ownership directly to me upon his passing, bypassing all intermediate heirs. My father had hidden it, but not destroyed it. Perhaps guilt had stayed his hand. During probate, he had named himself interim executor, which gave him control over the operating accounts and subsidiaries even while the title sat quietly in a drawer. I sat there on the floor for a long time, the papers spread around me like pieces of a map leading back to who we were supposed to be. A knock startled me. Soft, tentative. When I opened the door, a young woman stood there holding a flashlight. "Uncle Liam?" she said. "Dad said you might be out here." It was Clara, my late brother's daughter. 17, wide-eyed, wearing her father's old jacket. "I saw your truck," she said. "Mom said you've been digging into Grandfather's things." "Need a hand?" I smiled. "Maybe I do." "You're good with details, right?" She nodded, stepping inside, curiosity blooming. "Granddad taught me how to read ledgers before he got sick. He said numbers tell stories." I handed her the folder. "Then let's see what story he wanted us to read." Together, we spread the documents on the workbench, her flashlight trembling slightly as we examined seals, dates, transfers. For the first time in months, the air inside the workshop felt alive again, like purpose had come home. When Clara left, she promised to return the next afternoon. I watched her walk back toward the farmhouse, the beam of her flashlight bobbing through the dark. The future, I thought, might just have a heartbeat again. Later, as I drove into town to lock the documents in a safety box, I passed the office windows of my father's company. Light spilled across the parking lot, Inside, Sarah stood near his desk, phone pressed to her ear, laughter shining in her eyes. She didn't see me watching from the street. She didn't know that the ground beneath her victory had just shifted, one quiet truth at a time. By February, the Carrington name had become something whispered, not spoken. Contracts slipped away like leaves from a dying branch. My father's partners stopped calling. Even the bank, once eager to lend, had begun asking quiet questions. Sarah pretended not to notice. She filled her days with spending. New furniture, new cars, new wardrobes, objects meant to hold together an image that was already cracking. The newspapers showed her smiling at fundraisers, her jewels catching the camera light like tiny suns. I'd watch those photos appear online, the captions praising Mrs. Carrington's elegance, and wonder how long it would take for the truth to show. Through the polish, it didn't take long. The first sign came when the winery foreman called me, not my father. "Mr. Liam," he said hesitantly, "the bank froze our line of credit. Mrs. Carrington said the accounts were being restructured, but no one's been paid. I told him to keep the staff working." "You'll be compensated," I promised. "Just document everything." He didn't ask how. He must have heard something in my voice, certainty maybe, or the quiet relief of a storm that finally knows where to strike. I hadn't spoken to my father since that afternoon in the study. But his messages started coming, short, clipped, always late at night. "We need to talk. This has gone too far. Sarah made mistakes, but you're still my son." I didn't answer. Clara visited the workshop almost every evening after school. Together, we traced transactions, comparing signatures, tracking transfers between shell companies. Her precision amazed me. "Granddad was right," she said once, tapping a column of numbers. "Patterns tell stories." "This one's a confession," I smiled. "Let's make sure it's written down properly." Mr. Delaney had been quietly verifying each record we found. The more he uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Sarah had been siphoning money into accounts under her children's names while my father signed everything she placed before him. Fraud by consent, a tragedy dressed in marital trust. By March, their empire was hollow. The credit lines snapped, investors fled, and one by one, the properties they'd flaunted began to vanish into foreclosure listings. One afternoon, as I locked the workshop, Sarah's voice came through my phone. I hadn't heard it since the day she offered me that check. "Liam," she began softly, "we need your help." Her tone was wrong. No velvet, no superiority. Just exhaustion. "The bank's being unreasonable. They're threatening to seize the estate. Your father is beside himself. He won't listen to me." I watched the sun sink behind the vineyard, washing the fields in red-gold light. "You should talk to the lawyer who arranged those adjustments," I said. "He might have ideas." "Don't be cruel," she whispered. "You're punishing him too." "Sarah," I said, "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just letting gravity do its work." The silence on the line was long and brittle. Then, click. Later that week, the foreclosure notice arrived publicly. The Carringtons' accounts were frozen pending investigation. My father, desperate, called from an unknown number. "Liam," he said, his voice trembling between authority and fear. "You have to speak to the bank. They're saying I violated a clause in the trust." "It's nonsense. You have to intervene before what?" I asked quietly. "Before they take everything." I looked across the desk at the open deed, the one with my name on it. "They already have, Father. You just didn't notice when it began." He tried again, voice cracking. "You don't understand what Sarah's done." "I understand perfectly," I said, and ended the call. The next morning, I met Clara and Mr. Delaney at the courthouse steps. She carried a binder thick with evidence. Delaney held a single envelope stamped with the Carrington seal. He handed it to me with a measured nod. "Everything is verified," he said. "Every signature, every transfer. The covenant stands intact," I exhaled, slow and steady. The winter wind cut through my coat, but I felt no chill. Delaney placed a hand on my shoulder. His voice lowered to that solemn tone I'd heard once before in his office months ago. "It's time," he said quietly. "The clause can now be enforced." The office that once smelled of polish and pride now reeked of dust and defeat. Blinds half-drawn, papers scattered, the heavy mahogany desk stripped of its trophies. The Carrington crest on the wall hung crooked, a small symbol of how far everything had tilted. My father sat behind the desk, hands folded, a half-empty glass beside him. The lines around his mouth had deepened, but the old authority still clung to his posture, habit pretending to be strength. "You took your time coming," he said without looking up. "I wanted to see what was left," I answered. "Now I have," he let out a dry laugh. "You think this pleases you? Watching your own father fall?" "I didn't push," I said. "You built the edge yourself." He leaned back, eyes rimmed red. "You've always been righteous, Liam. Always looking down your nose, pretending you're better. I did what I had to, for the family." I waited until the echo of his voice settled. "No," I said quietly. "You did it for Sarah. Family doesn't destroy itself for comfort." That landed between us like a closing door. He turned toward the window, the vineyard stretching out beyond the glass, bare and gray under late winter light. "She was just trying to help," he muttered. "We had plans, expansion, investments. She believed in me. She believed in money," I said. "And you believed she was the one thing you could still control." His jaw tightened. "Don't speak about her like that." "Then tell me, Father, where is she now?" He flinched. "She's at the house." "She was," I corrected. "An hour ago she emptied the accounts that weren't frozen. She's packing what's left of the jewelry and whatever pride she can fit into a suitcase." He stared at me, disbelief thinning into dread. "You're lying." I placed a folder on the desk. The documents inside were precise, color-tabbed by Clara. "These are certified copies from Delaney's office. Every transaction traced, every fraudulent signature verified. The covenant clause is active." He opened the folder with trembling hands. "You don't understand what this means." "It means," I said, "that the estate reverts to its rightful owner." Grandfather protected it from exactly this kind of betrayal. His voice cracked. "I'm your father." "I know," I said. "That's what makes this hurt." He pushed the papers away and stood, unsteady. "Do you want me ruined? Is that it, to watch me crawl?" "No," I said softly. "I just want you to stop pretending you built what you were willing to sell." For a long moment, he didn't speak. The silence stretched until it felt like the room itself might break under its weight. Finally, he whispered, "She said we could fix it." "She was wrong," I said. "And you knew it the moment you signed her papers." He sank back into the chair, shoulders collapsing inward. The man who once lectured me on legacy now looked smaller than the chair that held him. Outside, the wind rattled the blinds. I gathered the documents, slid them into my briefcase, and turned toward the door. "Liam," he said, his voice a ghost of itself, "what happens to me now?" I paused at the threshold. "You live with the truth. That's more than you gave anyone else." I walked out, my footsteps echoing down the corridor where portraits of our ancestors lined the walls, faces carved in oil and varnish, all watching in silence. From the foyer window I saw movement at the driveway. Sarah stood beside a waiting car, the trunk open. 2 suitcases. 1 designer handbag. She wore dark glasses, though the sky was gray. For a moment she looked back toward the house, not with regret, but calculation, measuring how much of the ruin she could still claim as her own. Then she climbed into the car. The driver pulled away, tires crunching over gravel, scattering the last of the winter leaves. Behind me, the door to my father's office closed with a hollow sound. And just like that, the Carrington empire, built on deceit, gilded by appearances, was gone. Spring came late to Virginia that year. The vines were slow to green, the soil heavy with the memory of winter. But the land, like people, has a way of healing when left to its own rhythm. I stood at the edge of the Carrington estate, boots sinking slightly into damp earth, the smell of rain and cut wood in the air. Behind me, the old workshop glowed with new light, fresh paint, repaired windows, the sound of hammers and voices. Mr. Delaney had insisted on coming in person to finalize the papers. "You could sell this land for 10 times its worth," he said, adjusting his hat against the breeze. "Developers would line up around the block." I smiled faintly. "That's exactly why I won't." Clara joined us, her hands dusty from sorting old tools inside the workshop. She had her grandfather's steady eyes, curious and kind. "It's almost ready," she said. "The benches just need sanding." Delaney looked at her, then at me. She's got the same determination you had at her age. Better, I said. He handed me a folder, the estate's official restoration documents. It's all yours now, Liam. The title, the trust, every acre. You've done your grandfather's name proud. I ran my thumb along the embossed seal. I didn't do it for the name, I said. I did it for what he believed names should stand for. That afternoon, the three of us stood inside the workshop, sunlight spilling through the open door. The air smelled of linseed oil and sawdust, like the past had simply been waiting for us to return. Clara unrolled a new sign she'd designed. The Carrington Foundation, Crafting Futures. Below it, the inscription read, "Founded in honor of James Carrington, whose hands built more than walls. They built integrity." When she hung it over the door, I felt something inside me settle. "Granddad would have liked that," I said quietly. "I hope so," she replied, wiping a streak of dust from her cheek. We walked the property together that evening, marking areas for the restoration project. The vineyard would stay small, managed by local workers. The barns would become classrooms. The old guest house, where Sarah once hosted charity luncheons, would be converted into a training center for young craftsmen and carpenters. "Everyone deserves to learn how to make something real," I told Clara. "Something that lasts." She nodded, eyes shining. "That's what you're doing now," I smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just fixing what was never meant to break." Weeks passed. Word of the foundation spread quietly. Neighbors volunteered, small donations trickled in, and soon the workshop was full of life again. Students sanding, building, laughing. One morning, while Clara was arranging new tools on the wall, I noticed a headline on the local paper folded near the porch. "Former businessman Richard Carrington and wife under investigation for fraudulent transfers." Below, a grainy photograph showed my father and Sarah exiting a courthouse. Their expressions were unreadable, too proud to plead, too tired to fight. Clara glanced at the paper, then at me. "Are you going to say anything?" I shook my head. "No. Some stories finish themselves." She didn't press further. We went back to work, the rhythmic sound of planing wood filling the silence. As dusk fell, we locked up the workshop. The fields shimmered under the fading light, soft and gold. Clara lingered by the doorway, thoughtful. "Uncle Liam?" She said yes. She hesitated. "Will you ever forgive them?" The question hung in the air like the scent of cedar. Familiar, hard to answer. I looked out toward the horizon where the sky met the rolling hills. The same view my grandfather must have watched 100 times before. "Forgiveness isn't about them," I said finally. "It's about what we choose to build next." She smiled faintly, as if understanding more than her years allowed. Together we walked back toward the house, our footsteps soft against the earth that, at last, was ready to grow again. A full year had passed since the estate came back to life. The vines now stretched high and full, their green rows rippling gently under the morning breeze. The Carrington name no longer belonged to headlines or courtrooms. It belonged to the soil again, and to the hands that worked it. The workshop was open 6 days a week. Young apprentices came from nearby towns, some from farther still. The air there smelled of pine and promise. Clara managed the classes now. Her voice carried through the open windows with the same calm confidence that once belonged to her grandfather. Sometimes I'd stop by and just listen. The rhythm of hammers, the laughter, the sound of something being built the right way. I didn't stay long inside the office anymore. I preferred the fields, the quiet stretch of land that never lied. From there, I could see almost everything we had rebuilt, and beyond that, the small road that curved toward the hills, where the past had gone to rest. My father lived in a cottage on the outskirts of town now, a simple place he rented near the river. He never remarried. He called once, months ago, to say he hoped I was well. I told him I was. That was enough. Sarah had vanished completely. Some said she left for Europe. Others said she was living under another name, still chasing something that could never be caught. Neither story interested me. The morning of my grandfather's anniversary, I drove to the old cemetery at the edge of Charlottesville. The path was lined with maple trees, their leaves just beginning to turn. The air smelled faintly of rain and wood smoke. His headstone was modest, like he'd wanted. No marble angels, no carved symbols of wealth. Just his name and the words, "He built with honor." I knelt beside the grave and placed a small wooden carving on the stone. A bird, wings spread mid-flight. It was the last thing we'd made together when I was a boy, before he grew too weak to hold a chisel steady. I'd kept it all these years, the grain worn smooth from time and handling. "You were right, grandfather," I said quietly. "Greed always destroys itself. But the things built with patience, they last." A breeze moved through the trees, scattering a few leaves across the path. For a moment, the air felt different, warmer somehow, as if the land itself had exhaled. I stayed there a while, not in sorrow, but in gratitude. When I finally stood, the sun was just cresting the hill behind the cemetery. The light broke through the branches in slow golden threads, spilling across the stone and the carving until both seemed to glow. I turned toward the road, my shadow stretching long across the grass. In the distance, I could see the outline of the estate through the morning haze, the house, the vineyard, the workshop alive with motion. Clara was already there, unlocking the doors, ready to teach the day's first class. Everything my grandfather had built, everything that had nearly been lost, was alive again, not because of revenge, but because of restoration. As I walked back to the truck, I thought about my father's words, about Sarah's laughter, about all that had fallen and all that had grown again in its place. You can't watch greed collapse from the outside. It collapses from within. All you have to do is step aside and let the truth do its work. At the gate, I paused and looked back one last time at the sunlight breaking across the hills, washing over the vineyard, the house, and the old workshop where it all began. Then I smiled, quietly. Then I watched them. Watched the light move over the land that had finally remembered its purpose. Watched the wind carry the scent of wood and harvest. Watched a legacy, not of wealth, but of integrity, begin again.